On a warm April afternoon in 1873, the financier Jay Gould took time off from counting his money to have lunch at Delmonico's, the fanciest restaurant in town. While he was eating, a lawyer walked over to his table, cocked his fist, and punched him in the face. A series of spectacular financial triumphs, some said swindles, had made Gould fabulously rich. Now, at the age 36, he was the most notorious business person in the country. Like others who tried to claw back money from Gould, the lawyer was getting nowhere in court. The laws were too weak, enforcement too lax, and the judges too crooked. Gould had them in his pocket. Another victim tossed Gould down a stairwell, yet another pulled a gun on him. Jay Gould was the mightiest disaster which has ever befallen the country, wrote Mark Twain. The people had desired money before his day, but he taught them to fall down and worship it. For Twain, Gould was the biggest robber of the barons. These opening selections come from the book that I wanted to talk to you today about. It's called American Rascal: How Jay Gould Built Wall Street's Biggest Fortune, and it was written by Greg Steinmetz. This is the second book that I've read on Jay Gould. The first one was called, Dark Genius of Wall Street: The Misunderstood Life of Jay Gould, King of the Robber Barons. And this one was written by Edward J. Renehan Jr. That particular book, I'm holding it here in my hands, is quite a bit longer than this book, American Rascal. It is about 310 pages. American Rascal's about 260. I guess it's not that much longer, but Dark Genius of Wall Street is a little bit more dense, and I think it has quite a bit more information on Gould. So if you were going to pick up both of these books here, I would say American Rascal would be a more concise version of Jay Gould's life. And that if you really wanted to dive in deeper and learn more about Jay, I would go with The Dark Genius of Wall Street. And I covered that book on episode 4. I went pretty deep into Jay Gould's life as a businessman, and I think that was around 2 hours. So if you'd like to check that out, that's episode 4. 30 episodes later, I guess we're on episode 34. We're going to cover him again. Some of the topics, such as like the Erie War and the Black Friday events, will probably be a little bit more concise in this episode. And I'm really trying to zero in on those critical elements where you and I can learn from Jay and take those lessons away and apply those to our business lives in one way or another. Now, it's important to note that Jay took a lot of actions that today would be considered illegal. At the time, they were perfectly legal, such as insider trading. But Jay, he also operated in the gray zone, and he also did a lot of illegal activities such as coercion and bribery. I'm not advocating any of those, simply trying to look at the top tier lessons that we can learn from Gould. He has a very interesting life, and I really admire how he was as a businessman. And the one thing that I really like about Jay is he doesn't give a shit about what other people think about him. He simply puts his strategy together and he executes upon that. And I think that's an extremely valuable lesson right at the top of the show for us, is we shouldn't give two shits about what others think of us, other than maybe our direct family and our good friends. We need to be driving our business forward, serving people and driving our business forward. And this is what Jay Gould did so well. And I'll cover this many times today on the show. And along with this, his public perception was generally very poor once he became well known. The newspapers love to drag his name through the mud. A lot of cartoons, you can still find a lot of those online today. If you just search on eBay by Jay Gould, you'll see tons of them for sale. Now, in the business community, with other business leaders such as the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, they had a lot of respect for Jay Gould. He was a brilliant strategist, and from the book here, I just wanted to cover real briefly what they said about him. Vanderbilt told a Syracuse newspaper that Gould was the smartest man in America. Rockefeller, when asked who he thought had the best head for business, answered, Jay Gould, without pausing to think. But the cold, hard facts, as described by the author about Gould, he summarizes it really well here. Gould was a master of his craft. Ruthless, yes. A liar, maybe. It depended on the definition. But no one disputed that he was an extraordinary problem solver, an unparalleled negotiator, an expert communicator, a lightning-fast thinker, and a masterful tactician with a staggering memory. He knew the numbers better than his accountants. He knew the law better than his lawyers. When it came to business, Jay Gould had it all. And the big question here is, what drives this? What makes him so deeply driven? And I really do think it's simple. It was his work ethic. From a child, he had a work ethic like no other. Gould complemented his natural endowments with nerves of iron and a work ethic, even as a teenager, so strong that it damaged his health and quite possibly shortened his life. With his mix of brains and a single-mindedness, he was suited to make the most of the moment. And it's important to know that Jay Gould, he would only live to be about 56 years old. And as he got later on in his career, he had this vision of creating a transcontinental railroad running from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And I think that if he would have lived another 20 or possibly 30 years, he would have accomplished that dream. He did get really close. At the height of his career, he owned something like 12 or 13 railroads, and he controlled one of every 6 miles of railroad across the United States of America, which is quite impressive. But Jay Gould, his life would be cut short primarily due to how hard he simply worked as a youth and as a young man. As we move on here in the book, the author, real early on, he asks kind of a valid question, and it kind of piques your interest. When I first saw this, I wrote a big star around this, and I said, is that a good question? And it really is. And the question is basic. It's only 4 words. Why does gold matter? Because at his particular time in history, he was one of the largest employers in the United States. And the railroads are basically the internet of the 19th century. After the Civil War, they dominated everything. Anybody who was anyone was getting into railroads. I kind of think of it like as AI today. Everyone's getting into AI. Well, the railroads was the AI of the 19th century. It says, Gould built as much track as anyone. And it goes on to say that he had controlled over 16,000 miles of track, and he built something like 4,000 miles of his own. And as I previously mentioned, he had owned as many as 12 to 13 railroads at one given time. It says here, Gould's contributions elevated St. Louis, Kansas City, Dallas, Denver, Omaha, and Memphis, not to mention the countless smaller settlements he literally put on the map. He was among the biggest employers, if not the biggest employer in the country. He reinvested his profits in a way that created more jobs and economic growth. So for those reasons alone, yes, I do believe that gold matters. He helped drive our nation by expanding the railroads and helping these towns and helping people put food on their tables. And I got to tell you, as I was reading through this book, Elon Musk pops to mind a lot, especially with SpaceX. At the time that Gould gets into railroads, he is kind of behind the 8 ball, if you will. And I think of it kind of the same way as Elon. When he got into the aerospace industry, we already had the Lockheeds and the Boeings. He was brand new. No one thought that he would ever survive, but he comes out of nowhere with his Falcon rockets and gets them into orbit. He was the first public company to ever put something into orbit. and he did it really, really well. Well, this is Jay Gould also as a young man. He takes control of his first railroad, and once he does that, he improves it and he makes a nice profit. And we're going to cover that real soon here on the show. All right, so I think what I'd like to do here is just go back to Jay's early life and take a look at his roots so that we could understand the foundation and where he comes from. Oh, and before I forget, if you would like to buy a copy of this book, American Rascal, you can use the link in the show notes. And I just want to be transparent here. That is an Amazon affiliate link. So if you do use that link, I'll get a small commission from Amazon. And what I'm doing is I'm donating 100% of any commissions that I earn through that link to help support children's literacy. I really think that Jay Gould would want you to buy this book. That's one thing that I agree with Jay on, is you should always be reading. That simple phrase, readers are leaders. We should always be reading, my friend. Okay, so let's jump into the book here. In 1853, when Jay Gould was 17, he made an announcement to his friend Abel Crosby. Crosby, he declared, I'm going to be rich. I've seen enough to realize what can be accomplished by means of riches. I'll tell you, I'm going to be rich. And he was not wrong. That starts off the first chapter of the book, actually. Everything previous had come from the intro. And Jay Gould, at 17, he announces that he's going to be rich to his friend. Where exactly does that confidence come from? You have to have a lot of confidence to just blurt that out to one of your friends like that. And in my view, I believe it's his keen sense of observation about how the world around him actually works. Then we combine that with his upbringing. If we go back to his very early memories, think about your earliest memory that you ever have. For me, it was going to the hospital and seeing my younger sister being born, or she was already born. I was like 2.5, maybe 3. In the book here, he's 4 years old when his mother passes away. And it says, Jay went with the girls are his sisters, to Mary's room. Mary is his mother's name. He pulled himself up on her bed, bracing his feet on the frame, and kissed her lips. They were cold. Mary Gould was dead at the age of 35, a victim of typhoid fever. At the funeral, Jay held Sister Anna's hand as the family buried Mary in the snowy ground of the Roxbury Baptist Church. Gould later said the only thing he remembered about his mother were her cold lips. That's just so sad as a 4-year-old boy seeing your mother go on the ground like that, and your memory of her is her cold lips. Now, while Mary's life was short, he did learn a lot from his mother around values. It says, Mary was said to have a head for money, along with an even temper. Gould inherited those traits. A more tangible link could be drawn to the flowers. After Gould made it big, he bought a country estate that came with the largest glass-enclosed conservatory in the country. He filled it with roses and hyacinthus. And that was his greenhouse at Lindenhurst. Actually, when he first bought Lindenhurst, the greenhouse burnt down pretty quickly thereafter, and he had it rebuilt even bigger and better. He would actually also raise orchids, and then he would crossbreed orchids, making his own strains. It's quite interesting how he spent his time outside of Wall Street and outside of his businesses. But for Jay, he's going to continue to be surrounded by death, because shortly thereafter, his father is going to be remarried to his second wife. She's going to die like a year later, and then he's remarried again for the third time, and that wife is going to die. And then sadly, his sister Nancy dies at the age of 11. And for Gould, that's 4 deaths in 4 years. So he's just constantly going to the cemetery. And you have to imagine that took a pretty deep toll on him. Then to top it off, his father turns to drinking. And that really leads to some devastating episodes. In one particular event, his father actually locks him in the basement. Just listen to this. John Gould could be cruel. Jay was once sent home from school for misbehaving. John locked him in the cellar. The girls returned from class and asked Jay's whereabouts. John, who might have been drunk, said he didn't know. Only later did he remember Jay was in the basement. The girls hurried to liberate their brother. They found him in tears. And this leads Jay to take a really firm stance against drinking. He cherished temperance for just about his entire life, and he felt that it actually gave him an edge in business. And we're going to see that here in just another couple of chapters in the book. In his escape from this is school and books. We can see that he's really deeply driven when he wants to learn something. He worked on math problems as long as it took to get an answer. He read whatever he could get his hands on. When John needed him for chores, Jay was often nowhere to be found. He was off hiding somewhere with his books. And for Jay at the age of 13, he mixed this self-discovery that school is too easy. So what does he do? At the age of 13, he transfers to a different school and he pays for it by himself. And what he does here, I really admire this, is he teaches himself bookkeeping and accounting, and then he goes out and he gets a job working for a local blacksmith so that he could pay for that school. After Jay's been at this new school for about a year or so, he's going to learn of a new teacher that came to his original school, and that teacher was said to have quite a really strong academic background, especially when it comes to surveying. Jay was really interested in the surveying. That was really a highly sought after trade. So Jay goes back home, and this teacher really becomes a great mentor for him. This is something that I think we can learn here from the book, is that we should always have those mentors in business who we can go to answer questions or look for guidance. And this is what this teacher did for Jay. He's actually going to be lifelong friends with this particular teacher. So at the age of 15 years old here, if we just take a look at the book, it says, Gould was rising at 3 to study by firelight. His area of interest was surveying. He hated the drudgery of farming and believed surveying was his way out. And I underline that, his way out is absolutely going to be his way out. If we go forward here, one more sentence. He got on with the draftsman who planned to make and sell a map of Ulster County. Ulster County, quite simply, that's where he lives in New York. And then another advantage here is this got him away from the farm. As we heard, he didn't like farming. He also didn't like being around his abusive father. This gives him distance there. And it also says in the book that by this point in time, he was always drunk. So Jay was always trying to avoid his father. So he starts working for this draftman, and this is really a keystone moment in Jay's life. What happens here? And I'm just going to read this. The draftsman had exhausted his credit. Jay was hungry. Miles from home and alone, he walked into the woods, sat by a tree, and fell into sobs. It seemed to me as though the world had come to an end, he said later. Prior to Jay setting out, the man that he was working for told him to keep a record of all accounts. So anytime he had a meal or he would stay in a room, he would write it down in a little journal, and then he would give a copy to whoever he stayed with as well. And then this draftsman would come around later and pay. But he learns quickly from several different farmers that this guy had done this before. He had never settled up on his debts, and that's the reason why Jay is rejected when he's looking for some food. And he finds himself here in the woods, and he's crying. He wants to quit. And what does he do? He digs in super, super deep, and he doesn't give up. He moves forward. The next house he comes to, it says, the farmer offered him 50 cents to use his surveying tools to make a noon mark, a simple sundial that indicated midday. with that, Jay was in business. And as I read that, it reminds me a lot of Stay Lauder in the point where she was trying to find a distributor. She had went to the distributor's office and she got there at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and she ends up sitting there all day till like 5:30 at night. She's watching mail after mail go in for appointments. She's sitting there waiting patiently. She's almost in tears. She wants to quit. She wants to leave. She wants to go home. She manages to stick it out. At the end of the day, the buyer comes out and says, "Oh my gosh, you're still here. Come in and tell me what you've got." Well, if you know anything about Estee Lauder, she didn't tell. She always showed. She pulled out her makeup kit and she did up the woman's face. The buyer was impressed. She didn't land a deal that day, but she did very shortly thereafter. Same thing with Jay here. He's out there, he's crying in the woods. He has the persistence to move on. And what happens? He finds himself in business, making those noon marks. He actually is going to make a few $100s from this. That was the first money I made in business, he said. Past this point, he goes on, he starts making his own maps of Ulster County and other counties that were in the area. And then he would go out and he would sell them to farmers, road contractors, railroad construction companies, and schools. And he even goes so far to try to introduce a bill through legislature that would require schools to buy maps of the counties where they were located. That ends up failing, but that lesson dealing with Congress is going to be very, very valuable for him in the future, as we're going to see here not too long from now. So we can clearly see here that Jay Gould, he's got this really deep drive. And it says that Gould filled his teenage years with deadlines, sales calls, and personal decisions. Consumed by work, he ate poorly and he slept little. I think that is something important for us to keep in mind as well, that while we're grinding away, working hard, we're deeply driven, we're trying to do the best that we can do, we also need to take care of our health, and we also need to sleep appropriately. Those make a big, big impact. But for Jay, he falls ill. He comes down with typhoid fever. This really gives him a lot of time to think about his life, and he's reading a lot. He's trying to think about school. And I really admire how Jay breaks down how he thinks about school around this time. This is really interesting. After this paragraph, I wrote, "Good choice." I just want to read this to you. Gould toyed with the idea of college and took prep courses in Albany. He visited Rutgers, Yale, Harvard, and Brown. After seeing the students darting to class and the professors sauntering the commons in their gowns, he concluded college was an expensive indulgence. Why bother with college when he could teach himself from books? Great, great choice. That's probably one of my top 10 paragraphs of the whole book. I can't agree more. So while he's recovering from typhoid fever, he takes a little bit easier job, at least from my perspective. He starts working at a general store. And I think this is where we see the first cracks of Jay Gould operating in a gray zone of business. And I just want to read this for you, and I think you'll understand exactly why I say that. Gould worked in a store owned by the most successful merchant in town, Edward Burhan's. Gould took a liking to Burhan's daughter Maria. One day, a farmer walked into the store and told Gould he wanted to talk to Burhan's about some land he had to sell. Gould knew the property, and the reason he knew the property was from his surveying. Surveying really gives him a huge advantage here and also later when he's building railroads. Keeping going from the book here. And he had a good idea of its worth. He offered to buy the parcel on the spot and closed the deal before Burhan's had a chance. Gould flipped it for a $5,000 profit, an amount equal to $100,000 in current dollars. Burhans was enraged. He fired Gould and made sure Maria had nothing to do with him. When it came to love or money, Gould chose money. And then shortly after that event is actually when he tells his friend that he's going to be rich. So we can kind of see the chain of events that led up to that statement. He had developed enough life experience through starting his own business, making those nude marks, selling maps, and then working in the general store using the knowledge that he had built up to do that land deal. So here you are, you're 17 years old, 18 maybe, and he has $100,000 already in his pocket, or I guess $5,000. I was putting that into today's terms. But that's a lot of money. So I can kind of understand where he's generating this feeling that he thinks he's going to be able to make it big. And that just gives him fuel to drive things forward. So another thing that I wanted to talk about here was a relationship that he had started to develop. When he was surveying, he had come across a gentleman by the name of Zadok Pratt. I just want to take a moment to give you a feel of Zadok Pratt. He is maybe 40, 45 years older than Jay Gould, but one day Pratt comes looking for Gould, and before I get to that reason, I just wanted to cover Zadok Pratt here a little bit. Born in 1790, Pratt began his career traveling town to town as a saddle maker. Then he ran a country store, worked 14 hours a day, and saved money by sleeping under the counter at night. He had his first big commercial success selling ores to the military in the War of 1812. Looking for a bigger opportunity after the war, he was riding through the countryside when he happened upon a site along the, I'm not going to be saying this right, Schoharie River, not far from Roxbury. He had instantly recognized it was a perfect location for a tannery. From the moment he signed the deed, his fortune was secure. Leather was a big business. The country needed shoes, boots, machine belts, leather breeches, and, as Pratt knew well, saddles. Tanners made the leather by soaking cowhides in tannic acid found in the tree bark. No tree produced more tannin than hemlock. No place in America had more hemlock than the Catskills. So we can see here that Pratt is a very successful businessman. So if we step back a few years to when Jay was 16, we're going to see the point in time which he comes into contact with Pratt. Some years before Pratt rode into Roxbury, Gould, then 16, had tried to sell Pratt a map. Pratt didn't need a map, but he liked Gould's spirit and promised to keep him in mind. Gould made sure of it by sending him letters and telling him about his maps and other projects. In my notes there, I wrote fostering relationships. Gould knew very early on that he needed to develop and foster those relationships that are going to help him out. I admire that also as a 16-year-old. You can see that Pratt has had some great success, and he keeps in contact with him, always sending letters. That way, Jay's always at the forefront of Zadok Pratt's mind. I think that is ingenious. So what happens here? One day, Pratt actually comes looking for Jay. And he's looking for him so that he could survey his farm. But Jay, he's got other ideas here. Gould was sick of surveying. He instead told Pratt about an idea he had. Gould's brother-in-law operated a tannery in Pennsylvania and knew about a hemlock forest near the Lehigh River. It was an ideal spot for a tannery. Not only was it on a river, but a crew was building a train line nearby to haul coal. Once the railroad opened, New York would only be a day away from the hemlocks. Gould wanted to build a tannery there and asked Pratt to back him. That is bold. That reminds me a lot about what Steve Jobs said about asking for help. He always would say that if you reach out to people and ask for help, they almost always say yes. Very few people say no. That's a superpower that we should always be mindful of. Reach out and ask for help. That's the same thing with Gould right here. It's basically reaching out, asking for help to start a business with Pratt. Now, the next thing that happens, this is really key. Gould, he didn't know if those hemlocks existed or not. So it's really upon him to go out and find it and make this deal happen. Gould grabbed his compass and his surveying tools and rode over the mountains and through the wild country. So after searching for a couple of days, he finds what looks to be hemlock, and he immediately brings Pratt out to the location. He returned with Pratt. They rode together, the slight young man with no money and a tall, rich 65-year-old man with money to burn. Pratt saw the hemlocks. He and Gould became business partners. Persistence pays off. That's a stay lauder right there, if you ask me. As a young woman, she would go every month to have her hair and her makeup fixed. And at the beauty salon, the owner asked her one day, she's like, can you leave some samples of your products? Her products were very popular, kind of word of mouth thing. And Estee says, yes, I'll bring some samples the next time. The next time she shows up at her store, Miss Morris is like, oh, just leave them there. I'll try them later. And it would have been real simple for Estee just to say, okay, here you go. But she didn't do that. She said, no, I want to show you how to use them properly. And by standing her ground, 5 minutes to show Miss Morris the proper way to use the cosmetics on her face, that changed the whole perspective for Miss Morris. She saw that they worked and she knew that they were good products, and she invited Estee to join her in her shop with her own little beauty counter. That was the first counter she ever had. And it's because she said, no, I'm not going to leave this here just for you to play around with. I want to show you how to use it properly. This is exactly what Jay Gould does. Goes out, he finds the hemlock trees, he brings Pratt back, and he shows them exactly where they're at. Another thing that I just thought of is he's matching his words to his actions. He didn't just say, oh, I know where some hemlocks are at, and then bring Zadok out there and stumble around for a week or a month or whatever. He brought them exactly to where they were at, closes the deal. In the deal that they come up with here, Pratt, he's going to invest $120,000 of his own money. Jay, he doesn't really have any cash to put in, but he is going to be responsible for all of the labor, getting the camp set up, getting the plant set up, and getting everything up and running. Jay, as we know already, he jumps in and he works extremely hard. He gets everything built out and he gets everything set up. And then something happens here. Pratt, he wants to use a newer technology in the plant. Basically, he wants to use steam. So what they would do is they would take the trees once they had stripped the bark off of them for the tanning process, and then they would burn the trees to use steam. And by doing this, they could produce leather year round. Gould, on the other hand, he just wants to put together a simple water wheel to get started. So the wheel would spin and it would power the machines to help produce the leather. But the problem with Gould's method was that in the wintertime, the stream would freeze over, so they would have to shut down. So Pratt, he really wants to use this new technology. So Jay agrees, they move forward, and they get this first machine, and it arrives on site, but it doesn't work. So they have to send it back. It takes like 6 months or something like that to get a replacement steam engine on site that would do the job. Now, this entire time, Jay could have been sitting around, pissing his time away, doing nothing. But he doesn't do that. What does he do instead? He learns everything that he can possibly learn about the tanning business. He meets Pratt's son, George. Pratt's son, George, the one who later died at Bull Run, worked for his father as a leather broker in the swamp. In the swamp is the area of New York where all of the leather merchants would buy and sell before the war. He made a living buying and selling Gould's hides. Gould occasionally tagged along with George. The visits confirmed something he suspected. Not only could he make more money buying low and selling high, he could also make money as a broker, buying and selling for someone else. The best part was that he didn't have to put up his own money. He could pocket handsome commissions as the go-between. Gould pummeled George with questions. And as a note here in my book, I wrote, yes, indeed, 1 or 2 hours, just 1 or 2 hours with somebody that has that high level knowledge can basically be, in my opinion, a degree. He probably learned more in a few hours with George than he would have learned from any 4-year degree on buying and selling. Gould was absolutely right earlier when we said that he could learn all he needed to learn from books, or in this case, learning from other knowledgeable people. That's a valuable lesson for us, if you ask me, that we should seek out those valuable experts and try to get as much information as we possibly can and let them teach us. These learnings are going to be really, really key here in just a little bit. Now, if you remember just a few moments ago, I was telling you about that steam engine. It had finally arrived, so they could finally get started in business here. And how does everything go? For Gould, it had been a year of furious efforts, punctuated by maddening delays. As the cash rolled in, he had a reason to cheer. He had half an interest in a profitable tanning operation supplied with enough hemlock to last for years. He was 22 years old. He could see the day when he would be rich, just like he predicted. But being an operator, Gould, he was really unsatisfied. Leather production itself wasn't a bad business. He could work his tail off, expand the factory, hire more workers, and tan twice as many hides as Pratt ever did. But it occurred to Gould he could make even more money by understanding the forces that move prices and then trading on that knowledge. Gould had taught himself bookkeeping. He had taught himself surveying. He had even taught himself about Shakespeare, Milton, and Pope. Now he would teach himself everything about how leather was bought and sold. I want to gain a grasp at bartering, he wrote to a friend. Those lessons from George Pratt, they were invaluable. His mind is really on the swamp. It's not on the tannery, it's on the swamp. He knows that's where he's going to make his real living. Or we should probably say just up the street from the swamp on Wall Street. And then if we step into Gould's head real quick here, we can see what he wrote to his father in a note here. Gould decided New York, not the backwoods, was the place for him. And then in quotes here, I've come to realize, he wrote to his father, that this is the merchants who command the true power. The brokers take what seem to be the smallest share, but in fact the largest. Theirs is nearly pure profit, made on the backs of the shippers and the tanners, never their hands dirtied. End quote. That is key. Gould, he knows that he wants to use his brains over physical activity, and this is what he's going to do. Now, if we jump forward just a little bit here, he's still operating the tannery, but in September of 1857, a financial panic is going to be set off. What happens to the leather price is it basically drops by more than half. And at this point, the tannery is now losing money. And then if you compound things even further, Gould and Pratt, they're having problems. They don't see eye to eye on how to run the tannery. And at this point, Pratt, he makes a proposition to buy Jay out for $10,000. But remember, they had agreed to be 50-50 partners. And for Jay, that is not going to fly. From the book here, Gould told Pratt to stuff it. He'd take $60,000 for his stake, but not a penny less. Pratt turned Gould's logic back on him. If Gould really thought a half share was worth 60,000, Pratt would be willing to sell his own half share to Gould for that amount. Confident that Gould could not conjure up the money, Pratt gave him 10 days to decide. So Jay, he quickly runs to the swamp and he's looking for somebody to make a deal with. It doesn't take him long. He makes a deal with one of the largest traders in the swamp. His name was Charles Lepp. The agreement that they come up with is that Lepp is going to own 2/3 of the tanning business, and then Jay would own the other third. And again, if we go back to the concept of building relationships, Lepp was someone that Jay had dealt with, and it says that Lepp himself had brought some of it, meaning his leather, and knew the quality was good. Besides, if Pratt was interested in the tannery, it had to be worth something. So Lepp is familiar with Pratt, obviously, and he knows that if Pratt has been in it for this long, that, it was worth his investment. Gould took Lepp's money and paid Pratt. And I can only imagine the look on Pratt's face, because he doesn't think that he's ever going to be able to make that amount of money. And here he is, this young man, 22 years old at the time, handing over $60,000. And then we kind of go back to that question, why did Charles Lepp do this? Well, add to the fact that Lepp, he's going crazy here. Gould's new partner saw elephants in the living room and bats on his shoulder. He thought detectives hid in his rafters. He demanded someone check his pulse every 10 minutes to prove he was still alive. And before we get to Lepp's demise, I just wanted to mention here that Lepp, he was a trader in the swamp. He wasn't a manufacturer. So he had to keep it secret that he was partners with Jay Gould, because if other traders and other manufacturers in the swamp found out that he was also manufacturing, that was not going to be really good for him. So what happens is that Jay becomes the sole owner on paper, even though Lepp was really 2/3 owner. That's going to be really, really important coming up here soon. Now, if we hop back to Lepp, as I said, he was going crazy. And one day, he comes home from work, he kisses his daughter on the head, and he heads to his study. A moment later, everyone in the house, they hear a gunshot, and they find Lepp. He has, unfortunately, shot himself in the heart, and just what an awful way to go out. Lepp's partner was David Lee, and he reaches out to Gould to set up a meeting so that they could agree on terms for the tannery. So Jay, he goes to Lee's office, and at this point, he's turned away. Jay comes back the next day, and he's still not there. And Jay figures out pretty quickly that Lee is gone, and then he gets some inside information that Lee is actually went to the tannery to take it over. Now, that basic fact that Gould was the sole owner, this is the point where it plays to his advantage right here. Let me read this for you. Gould went to his lawyer. The lawyer told him something useful. Even though Lee and the estate owned more stock in the tannery than Gould, Gould could throw Lee off the property for trespassing. That's because, thanks to Lepp's attempts to hide his ownership, Gould was registered as the sole proprietor. Just super, super critical to have all of your legal ducks in a row. On episode 4, I covered the tannery battle in great detail, and I would highly recommend you listen to episode 4 if you'd like to understand in more detail about the tannery battle and how it all went down, or even just read The Dark Genius of Wall Street. It handles it really well. American Rascal also covers it very well, but just a few key facts here. So Lee, he rounds up 50 men. And what does he pay them with? He pays them with whiskey. So they're liquored up, they're drunk, they think they're going to be able to fortify the tannery and take control of it. And then with their approach, they're just going to gun everyone down. But, they're drunk. That's big talk, right? Jay, he arrives, he goes out and he rounds up, very easily, he rounds up 250 men. And why? Gould easily found recruits. The people of Gouldsboro knew their boss as someone who worked alongside them and paid them without interruption. Quite simply, that is employee loyalty. It reminds me a lot of Sam Zamuri. We covered Sam Zamuri, episode 9, I think it was. He was the banana man. He worked in the fields with his employees. He was in the warehouses. He knew everything about his business from the front lines, and he was highly respected. He didn't stay in the boardroom. He didn't hide out in his office. He was out in the fields and in the warehouses with his workers. And as a result, he had incredible employee loyalty. And just both of these situations really make me think about being on the front lines, always being engaged. To know your business down to the ground, know everything that's happening, be aware of everything that's happening. For Jay Gould, he's got 250 people at his side. He narrows it down to 50 people, and they go into battle. Well, as you can imagine, the battle doesn't last very long. The guys inside, they're drunk. Jay, he splits his 50 men up, 25 in the front, 25 in the back. They distract the men by trying to get in the back, and once those drunk men inside are heading to the back, they bust through the front doors and basically take him out. No one's wounded or killed. A few people, I think, get hurt. Gould, he takes his tannery back. And Gould attributes the win to temperance. As I mentioned earlier, he really hated drinking as a result of his father. And he says the following: I used the most vigilant care to prevent the use of a single drop of liquor, Gould said, for it is a well-known fact that I neither use it myself or countenance in others. The temperance movement was gaining steam. Gould, the son of an alcoholic, was an advocate. This wouldn't be the last time he preached sobriety. And shortly after taking the tannery back over, Gould is actually going to turn it over to others to run. He's going to take a new direction in life. At the end of chapter 3 here it says, I am trying to start myself in the smoky world of stocks and bonds, he wrote to a friend in November of 1860. There are magician skills to be learned on Wall Street, and I mean to learn them. And learn them indeed he will. Gould, he ends up taking a room at the Everett House. This was a well-known hotel near Wall Street. And at the time, Wall Street, it's just barely getting established. Hot stocks at that time are the railroads. If you think about AI and tech stocks today, that's how the railroads were back then. They ruled the day. Everything was about the railroads because they were fueling the growth of the United States. And what do railroads need? They need a lot of capital, tons of it, as the book describes. Railroads needed outside capital. They needed it in staggering quantities. They needed to pay for land, rails, and rolling stock. Wall Street put the country on industrial footing. Trading in railroad stocks dominated the New York Stock Exchange, and Wall Street itself became crowded for the first time. So Gould, he sets himself up as a stockbroker, but he plays things a little bit different from some of the others that are already established here. Let me just read for you how Gould sets himself up. Gould didn't invest on hunches. He dug deep to discover whatever was knowledgeable, separating the nonsensical from the plausible. He was more methodical, more voracious in search of insights, and more patient with the minute. These qualities served him well in the hand labor of surveying and tanning. They served him even better in the brain labor of Wall Street. Ooh, I like that. Brain labor of Wall Street. Brain labor. That's a good one. I didn't notice that the first time I read it. Brain labor. I'm going to have to remember that. That's good. And I really think this approach plays true today. And that's a valuable lesson for us. There's so much information available to us. Just think about all of the different AI tools that we now have available, all the books, the libraries, online resources. There's really no reason for you to not know your field better than anyone else. And if you don't know, there's so much resources just to go figure it out. For example, look at Elon Musk, bringing him up again, SpaceX. He didn't know shit about the aerospace industry when he started SpaceX. What did he do? He dove into books. He borrowed propulsion and aerospace technical manuals from his friends. He read them over. He studied aggressively and he learned and he educated himself. That's something that we can all do. All the information's out there. All we need to do is acquire it and consume it. And this is what Jay did. And then another thing comes out of his Wall Street trading days. He meets a gentleman by the name of Daniel Miller. Miller, after a couple of years of knowing Gould, introduces him to his daughter, Ellie. They're going to court for a couple of years, and eventually they would be married. They have 6 kids together, and they stay married till death do they part. She was really his peace and solitude. Now, shortly after they're married, Gould is going to come into his first railroad deal. And this is quite interesting how this goes down. Before I do tell you about his first railroad deal, I just wanted to describe real quickly so that you can get a general idea of the 2 primary ways that railroads were operated at the time. And maybe it's still like that today. I'm not sure. I don't know much about modern day railroads, but at this given time, there were 2 kind of primary ways. The first was the Vanderbilt way. Vanderbilt, he owned the Central and the Harlem and some other railroads. But what it came down to for him is that he would take good care of the railroads, all of the buildings that the passengers would pass through, all of his engines and his cars were in good shape, and he really provided a service to the public and to those who needed to carry freight across his railroad. The second way was the Daniel Drew way, and I'm going to talk about Daniel Drew here in just a little bit if you're not familiar with him. Basically, Daniel Drew was a looter of his own company. He didn't give 2 shits about how the railroad functioned. Passengers were of his least concern. All he wanted to do was use the railroad to manipulate the stock price. It was like a plaything for him. So that was the second way. So I see it as 2 ways. The good way, the way Vanderbilt operated them, and then the bad way, the way that Drew operated them. And if we look at Jay Gould from a broad perspective over his entire career, he's going to play both sides. And it reminds me a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde, if you will. Okay, so if we go back to the first railroad deal, here's how everything goes down. This is from page 31 of the book. An acquaintance from the swamp offered Gould a large block of bonds in the troubled railroad, the Rutland and Washington. Its locomotives, with balloon stacks and cow catchers, hauled quarry stones from Rutland, Vermont to Troy, New York, where freight handlers transferred the cargo to barges for the journey down the Hudson. Stone volumes hadn't materialized as expected, and the price of the railroad's bonds came to only 10 cents on the dollar, a value that suggested the railroad would fail. Gould liked the price. He judged the Rutland's assets as solid and believed in the railroad. That is important. He believes in the railroad. In the right hands could turn a profit. Plus, the bonds could be converted into enough stock for him to take control. Gould bought the bonds for $5,000, converted them to stock, and named himself president. Gould had never worked for a railroad other than as a surveyor. He counted on his general knowledge of business to see him through. So, like everything else in life, he dives in head first. During the week, he's in Vermont running the railroad. In which direction does he go here? I just discussed good and bad. He's going to take the high road with this first railroad. He invested in track, cut costs, and pitched customers on the railroad services. He also pinched pennies. So Gould uses his bookkeeping skills here, and he's keenly aware of controlling cost. This is something we see on almost every single episode, is controlling cost. He's going to do this aggressively over the course of his career, regardless of what he's doing, controlling cost. We always need to control cost. In fact, just listen to this. This is crazy how we control this cost. This comes down to personal costs. If you're controlling your personal costs, this is going to spill over into business. An office boy named Charles Frost worked for Gould in Vermont, earning 50 cents a day to run errands. Frost once accompanied Gould on a trip to buy wood for the locomotives. After a morning spent measuring logs, they broke for lunch. Gould offered a share of some of his food that he had brought. He was a man of means, and Frost expected a feast. Gould pulled from his satchel nothing but dried prunes and crackers. Again, if you're controlling your personal costs, that's going to spill over into business. It's all about cost control. Always be watching your costs. That's the simple, basic lesson. And if that doesn't speak for itself, I don't know what does. Prunes and crackers. So for Gould, he's in this railroad for about 18 months. He puts $5,000 of his own money into it to take control of it, and eventually he ends up selling it to a rival railroad, bringing him a profit of over $100,000. Or as it says in the book, $2.5 million in today's terms. And he's just a young man, newly married, and I think he has maybe one child at the time. Even more important is that he can go back home and spend this time with his cherished wife. He also has his firstborn child, George, at this time. So he gets back to what is really important to him, is his family life. He really enjoys his family. We also get to see this really remarkable introspection that Gould has in a letter that he writes to the former teacher that I had mentioned kind of at the start of the episode, the one that was his mentor and the one that helped him get into surveying. This is what I also opened episode 4 with. I really like the way Jay Gould writes right here and what he says. Now that I am at this place, it is a puzzlement to me how I endured before. Everything prior seems to have been boxing in the dark, scraping without reason. Now I have my road to walk and my reason for walking it. Now the pieces fit, and this thing, ambition, is no longer blind, but divine, a true and noble and necessary path. I see things very, very clearly. I feel inspired with an artist's conception. Divine inspiration? I cannot say, but my road is laid out before me in the plainest of ways. I just really love when we see that exact part when someone discovers their purpose in life. That's the way that I read this. This is Gould discovering his exact purpose and calling in life. So what would Jay do after he sells off his railroad? I think that's a really good question. What he does is he heads back to Wall Street. And this is something that he's going to do a lot. He's going to bounce between being an operator and being a speculator or an investor. From the book here, we get a good insight on this. Gould had been CEO of a railroad. Now he was back on Wall Street trading stocks. What did that make him? Was he a railroad man or an investor? He didn't know himself. The opportunity struck in the form of one of the largest enterprises in the country, the Erie Railroad. The story of how Gould seized Erie shows his brilliance as a financial strategist, his deep understanding of the law, and a surprising grasp of human nature, and a mastery of political rivalry. And we're about to see Jay Gould, the good railroad operator, shift gears into the bad railroad operator. And the next chapter in his life is what is described as the Erie War. He's going to basically be a household name. And just a little bit of background on the Erie Railroad so you have some familiarity with it. It was the first railroad to connect the Great Lakes with the Atlantic Ocean. So it was quite prominent at the time, but the Erie, it has a really poor reputation. It doesn't keep up with its rolling stock. It's very decrepit. It doesn't keep up with the rails that it's putting down, and it's a wide gauge track, so other trains can't ride on it very easily. Plus, it had a really bad service record. It had a lot of accidents. There were always trains that were derailing. It has just a huge, huge mountain of debt. But beside all of this, it was still a coveted railroad. And in 1857, a large financial panic was set off. And this depresses the price of the Erie Railroad stock. So it was going to be taken over by a gentleman by the name of Daniel Drew, who we mentioned just a little bit earlier. And Daniel Drew, he was one of those evil operators. He didn't give a shit about his customer. He was only in it for personal gain. Let me just read a little bit about Drew so you can get a feel of him. With the ascension of Drew, Erie kept its day job as a railroad, but freelanced as a financial plaything for Drew and its other executives who, over the next several years, treated other shareholders with stupefying contempt. Being an insider was a dream come true for Drew. As an insider, he didn't have to make anything up. He just had to buy or sell ahead of corporate news. Even better, he could determine the news. He could raise the dividend or slash it on a whim. He could cut freight rates and scare investors. Or he could raise rates and whip up prospects for a higher profit. Erie's share price was a yo-yo in his hands. For extra cash, he could even have Erie award contracts to businesses he owned on the side. My goodness, this guy is just ruthless. Also, keep in mind, most of what he was doing was legal. Now, Vanderbilt, he had built the Central Railroad, and it had similar routes as the Erie. And he wants control of the Erie. So what he does is he starts buying shares in the Erie. He believes that if he buys enough shares that he can take control of the Erie. Daniel Drew, well, he didn't like that one bit. So the struggle between these two titans, it really starts to heat up. And who's in the middle? Other than Mr. Gould himself. Let's see how this goes down. Gould spotted the struggle developing between the two titans and angled to put himself in the middle. If managed deftly, he could profit regardless of which side won. The annual meeting of the Erie was coming up. To get himself elected to the board, Gould bought voting rights, known as proxies, from English shareholders too oblivious to care about the outcome. By voting for himself, Gould gained a seat. So Jay starts off in the middle, but he is going to tip towards Daniel Drew, and here comes Jay, the bad operator. Vanderbilt, he wants to stop Drew from flooding the market with new shares. So what does he do? He goes to his judge, and he has an order issued that prevents them from issuing new shares. The judge froze the Erie share count at 250,000 shares, the share count from 2 years before. The order assured that Vanderbilt could buy the majority of Erie's shares without fear of Drew fabricating more stock and diluting his ownership. And the judge was Judge Barnard. He was a Vanderbilt judge. What Vanderbilt would do is he would have his lawyers write up all the legal briefs, and then Barnard would rubber stamp them on his behalf. That was just the way that Vanderbilt and so many of the other robber barons operated at the time. That was kind of operating procedure. Now, as the temperature on the Erie starts to heat up, another colorful character enters the picture here, and his name is Jim Fisk. We spoke about Jim Fisk in quite a bit of detail on episode 4. He would also be heavily involved in Black Friday, where Gould tries to manipulate the gold price, but that's still a few years down the road. From the book here, we can learn just a little bit more about Fisk. He was a vulgar, bottom-pinching, cigar-chomping cotton smuggler with a weight problem named Jim Fisk. Fisk's first job set the tone for his career. He sold tickets for a circus, dressed in striped pants. He learned the arts of hyperbole, phony conviction, and persuasion. When Jim Fisk took over his father's peddling business, traveling around Vermont selling linens door to door, he doubled sales by painting his cart like a circus wagon and wearing a ringmaster outfit. Fisk's voice was shrill. When the overworked farm wives of New England heard their shouts, they ran outside, happy to let him brighten their day with a story. That is just a taste of Jim Fisk. It goes on to talk a lot more about Fisk, but I just wanted to give you kind of a general overview of Jim Fisk and his colorful nature and his background. So in my notes here, I wrote bad meets bad. Fisk is going to end up meeting Daniel Drew. It doesn't really say how that happens in the book, but at any rate, Drew, he takes a liking to Fisk and he makes him a stockbroker on Wall Street, teaching him all of his tricks. And like Gould, he learns to manipulate the market. He knows how to do a short squeeze. He knows how to do a pump and dump, and he knows how to read people and just how to manipulate the market. He is very, very good at this. Drew is so impressed with his abilities that not long after this, he actually puts Fisk on the Erie board. And this is where Jay Gould and Jim Fisk meet, and they end up becoming good friends. Gould and Fisk were about the same age, but had little in common. Fisk was loud, charismatic, emotional, and tubby. The pint-sized Gould was a prude and so soft-spoken that he often went unnoticed. The difference between Jay and me is that I have more trouble to get my dinner than to digest it, and Jay has more trouble to digest it than to get it. Despite the differences, they were so close that one associate described them as Siamese twins. Fisk admired Gould's brains. No one could think through a problem like Jay Gould, Fisk would say. Gould valued Fisk's energy and willingness for dirty work. Fisk had another quality Gould appreciated. Fisk was loyal, at least to Gould. Gould never had a truer friend. So here we have Fisk. He's this highly colorful character. And as part of the story, the share count for the Erie is frozen. Vanderbilt, he's buying up as much of the Erie as he possibly can eat. He's buying it all. But we have the brains of Jay Gould. And this is where knowing the law around your business is super key to success. And this reminds me a lot of Joe Coulombe, who was the founder of Trader Joe's. And before I touch on Gould here, let me just talk about Trader Joe and how he used the law to his advantage. You see, in the 1960s and 70s in California, they had fair trade laws, which basically meant if you bought liquor at a certain price, you could only mark it up by a fixed percentage. Joe Coulombe, he went through all of the distributors, and what he noticed was that different distributors had different prices for the same wine. He finds a small distributor that has the lowest prices. And why did that distributor have lower prices? Simple. They had lower acquisition costs. He goes to that distributor, and that distributor says, yeah, I can basically get you anything you want at any price that you want. if you have the lowest cost and then you mark it up by that fixed percentage, you're still lower than everybody else. And that puts Trader Joe's on the map as a huge wine supplier to the public. That's where knowing the law benefits Joe Colomb and Trader Joe's, and that gives them a springboard for success. Now, if we flip back over to Jay Gould here, the minor details in the law make all the difference, and I'm going to let the book explain this. He noticed that Barnard's injunctions against the new share issuance enjoined the Erie board and only the board. What if another entity, say Erie's executive committee, a group composed of Drew, Gould, and Fisk, issued the stock instead of the board? Would that work? The Erie lawyers liked the idea and followed up by finding a judge who signed an order expressly empowering the executive committee to issue shares. Before Vanderbilt knew about the order, printing presses began to roll and spit out fresh Erie share certificates. Bottom line there, all about knowing the law that surrounds your business. Gould found a way around the injunction that had been issued to them. Form an executive committee and issue new shares. Vanderbilt, what does he do? He keeps buying and buying and buying. He buys $7 million worth of shares, which stuffs the Erie's bank accounts. But that doesn't last very long because Vanderbilt became suspicious when he noticed that his buying wasn't affecting the share price. The price should have skyrocketed as shares became scarce. Instead, the price held steady. Vanderbilt looked at the certificates. What was this? The certificate looked new. They felt new. They smelled new. Then it hit him. Erie had thumbed its nose at Barnard's order and issued more shares. So Vanderbilt goes to his judge. The judge issues an order holding Gould, Drew, and Fisk in contempt. In very short terms, the sheriff in New York is after them. He's coming to arrest them. So what do? Gould and Fisk, they go to Delmonico's for a little celebration. Along with them, they bring Vanderbilt's cash, $7 million, stuffed in a bag. So they're sitting there, they're having dinner. They had hired a guard to keep watch for the sheriff. Midway through their dinner, the sheriff shows up. Those guys are tipped off. They run out the back door. They run down to the river, and they get a little rowboat to take them to the other side of the river to New Jersey. And it's cold, water splashing in. They got $7 million, and they're about ready to collide with other ships and boats that are on the river. They end up transferring to a larger vessel, and they make it to the other side with their $7 million. And I just, I picture these two titans going across the river. I think on the other episode I mentioned like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates in a big boat with like $7 billion or something like that. At any rate, they hide out in New Jersey. And why New Jersey? Well, quite simple. They can't be arrested by officers from New York. They were safe. So just listen to this craziness here. The law let fugitives come home on Sunday. During what came to be a 9-week sojourn in New Jersey, Gould ferried back on Sundays to see his family. He really does miss his family. He's a family man, and he wants to be at home. So he formulates a plan that is going to have everything that they had just done made legal. So what does he do? He heads up to Albany to start working his magic to see if he can get a law put in place making everything legal. And if you recall, kind of early in the show, we talked about Jay Gould working the legislature for the maps that he was making as a young man. This past experience really helps him out a lot with what he's trying to accomplish right here. So arriving in Albany, this time around, he has a lot of cash to play with. And, It's basically straight bribery. And I just wanted to read the law in New York around bribery at this time. New York had an impossible evidence standard for bribery. To establish guilt, a third party had to witness the payoff. As long as Gould closed the door when he handed over the cash, he was safe. And what he does here is just plain nuts. He bribes and he buys votes from all of the lawmakers. If Vanderbilt bought a vote for 3,000, Jay would just come back and double the vote. So needless to say, Vanderbilt eventually drops out of buying votes. In the Senate, they vote with Gould, and the bill that he was proposing passes 106-6 favor of the Erie. Plus, to add a cherry on top for Jay, it says the following. They gave the Commodore another kick by making it illegal for him to ever own Erie. The governor signed the measure the next day. Oh my goodness. However, the Commodore, that is Vanderbilt, he's beyond pissed, to say the least. Gould and Fisk, they actually go to his home to make peace talks because he was threatening to basically keep them tied up in court forever. He wanted those guys put in jail. They ended up giving him back a big chunk of his $7 million. And in exchange, Vanderbilt, he drops the legal proceedings. Daniel Drew, he leaves the board, but Vanderbilt allows Gould and Fisk to stay on the board. And that, my friend, is how Jay Gould won the Erie War. He outsmarted Vanderbilt, probably one of the smartest businessmen in the country at the time. In this war, makes Jay Gould a household name, as I mentioned earlier. So after Gould wins the Erie War, he takes over as president and chairman of the Erie. And he switches generally back to trying to improve the railroad or a good operator. He bought a steel mill so that Erie could make its own rails and replace its dilapidated tracks. He remade decrepit wood bridges with iron. He bought new locomotives. On the sales front, he signed an agreement with a small Pennsylvania railroad to ship 2 million tons of coal a year over the Erie. There were times when Gould worked 3 or 4 days in a row without sleep. So there we see is using his past experience to help him improve the railroad. That was the operational side. And then on the stock and financial side, Gould, well, he just kind of stayed dark. He raises $10 million from London investors for the Erie Railroad. In Gould, what does he do? He undertakes what is called a lockup. So what a lockup is he would take that $10 million, he would deposit it in the bank, and then he would write a certified check for $10 million. And when he writes a certified check, the bank has to keep the money in the bank. They can't lend it or use it in any other fashion because someone might go cash that check, and they need to have that money in place to issue, obviously. And when that happens, the interest rates rise because banks don't have cash readily available. So interest rate starts to creep up from 6, 7, 8%. And here's how Gould thought about it. Gould was envisioning a market manipulation on a grand scale. The fact that he even considered it displayed his capability to think big. He was willing to push the limits like no one else. His audacity was breathtaking. His target was Erie, just one of dozens of stocks on the exchange. To bring it down, he was prepared to hammer the entire market. New York Central, the Pennsylvania Railroad, Western Union, American Express, and every other stock on the exchange would be collateral damage. To make money on just one stock, he'd bring pain to everyone with money in the market. That couldn't be helped. He had spotted an opportunity. He had to take it. So Gould goes out and he sells the Erie short at $48. With the lockup in place a week later, it's down to $44. The next day it goes down to $40. Interest rates, they keep pushing up. It became full market panic a few days later when interest rates hit 10%. Desperation took over. Banks relieved their wants by throwing their stocks on the market for cash. The newspaper reported Erie hit 38, down $10 from the start of the lockup. All during this time, Gould, he's being dragged through the mud in the newspapers. Everyone hates this guy. By making speculative sales on his own company stock, Gould had committed the vilest form of fraud. In my book there, I wrote the darkest of the dark. That is really crazy. He initiates that lockup just to benefit from one stock. And for Gould, he finally does exit his short sale at $35. And to get a sense of his power, just listen to this. This is crazy. Then, as if commanding the wind to change direction, he canceled Erie's certified check and terminated the lockup. Everything that had blown north, interest rates, the money supply, the availability of bank credit, instantly blew south towards friendlier waters. The results were instant. Money was easy, reported the Times. Erie climbs from 36 to 52 quite rapidly after the lockup is over. And who rides it up? Yep, our friend Jay Gould rides it up, stacking cash. Okay, so the next major thing that I wanted to cover with you is what is known as Black Friday. This is what Jay Gould is probably best known for. And this takes place over several months, and it has a lot of moving parts that are quite complex. In the Dark Genius of Wall Street book, it covers 40 or 50 pages, maybe even more. And to summarize that episode, I just remember reading that section like 2 or 3 times, trying to put the parts together. I think in this book, American Rascal, the author does a really nice job in summarizing the events even further to make it a little more understandable. I felt like after reading it the first time, I had a generally good idea about Black Friday and how the events took place. And what I'm going to try to do is just simplify it even more so that you can have a good grasp of Black Friday and all of the major events that took place. If you want to know all the details about Black Friday, I would highly recommend reading this book or The Dark Genius of Wall Street. They both do a good job covering the events. So to start off here, it really does start with an observation. That's the first lesson. And this is something that we already touched upon earlier in the episode. Jay was really good at observing his surrounding and being aware of his surroundings. And what he had observed, he tells his friend Fisk, and I'm going to jump into the book here. In the summer of 1869, Gould shared an idea with Fisk. Demand for gold always surged at harvest time. They could make money if they bought gold and then just persuaded the government to let the gold price rise in line with seasonal demand, rather than do what everyone expected, which was to intervene to bring the price down. So, I mean, it sounds pretty basic. You just buy gold and you let the price go up and then you sell it. But if they could get inside support from the government, they can make even more money if the government doesn't put gold onto the market. During that harvest season, the price would just continue to go up and up. That's the plan anyways. Fisk, he doesn't really like this at first. He doesn't really see this as viable, and he really sees that this is a big risk, and he's out for now. As part of the overall scheme is President Ulysses S. Grant. He is newly elected to office. He doesn't really know a lot about economics. He's been a freaking war general. He's not a financial guy. He's a war general. So what does he do? He punts most of his financial decisions to his Treasury Secretary. His name is George Boutwell. He was the former governor of Massachusetts and also a longtime congressman. He knows a lot about finances. That's why he's in that position. And Boutwell, he really loves hard currency. So he wants to keep the price of gold in check. Now, what is Gould going to do to get in touch with Grant? And there's another character that I need to tell you about. His name is Abel Corbin. Let me just read for you here real quick. Gould made the acquaintance of a Washington insider named Abel Rathbone Corbin. Corbin was a lawyer and one-time St. Louis newspaper editor turned congressional staffer. He had a sharp mind, a charismatic smile, and a willingness to compromise himself to make money. He knew what strings to pull. In 1864, Lincoln needed Senate support for the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery. Corbin delivered him the votes. Now, the big factor here. This is the hole in the wall that lets Jay Gould start his scheme. Corbin soon became the president's brother-in-law, his confidant and intimate advisor. "I'm right behind the throne," Corbin said. Gould asked Corbin to help him persuade Grant to reverse course on greenbacks. If the president flipped and agreed to defy Boutwell, the gold price would still soar. And this, my friend, is another lesson for you and I out of this, the power of relationships. And I'm not advocating anything illegal here. I'm just talking about the power of relationships. We need to be aware of what relationships our contacts have. And this is key. On episode 11, we spoke about Kent Taylor, who was the founder of Texas Roadhouse. And he says that while leadership involves vision, strategy, and results, he says it's mostly about relationships, and that relationships with employees, suppliers, guests, and communities were the heart of his business. He considered it the defining element of great leadership is knowing and having those relationships. And I couldn't agree more. Jay Gould also couldn't agree more, and he uses the power of relationships to his advantage. Corbin, he put Gould in touch with Grant at a dinner party. At the party, Gould pitches Grant on his idea from the book here. After waiters cleared the plates, Grant surprised Gould by refusing a drink. He was trying to quit. Gould described to the president the plan he called the crop theory. "Consider this situation," he said. "Britain was a huge buyer of American grain. It paid in gold. So the more expensive gold became in greenback terms, the more greenbacks and thus more crops a British importer could buy with gold. Let seasonal demand lift the gold price. Let farmers have their day." Also at the president's side is Jim Fisk. Gould, he's using the power of silence to hear what the president has to say after his little speech. Fisk breaks the silence by saying, "What do you think?" And the president's response to this, "There is a certain amount of fictitiousness about the propensity of the country," the president said. "This bubble might as well be tapped in one way or another." Gould is simply dumbfounded, but at least he knows exactly where he stands. More work is going to be needed to convince the president to let the gold price rise. Shortly after this, Jay Gould sees another angle. The post of Assistant Treasury Secretary has become open. If Gould can get someone in that position that he knows that can help influence him, that would be a big benefit for him. Corbin, he knows just the man for the job. His name was General Daniel Butterfield. Grant appoints Butterfield on Corbin's recommendation. And who shows up 2 days later in Butterfield's office? Jay Gould. Gould went to Butterfield's new office 2 days after the appointment. It put him on retainer with a check for $10,000. That was $2,000 more than Butterfield's government salary. Gould now had his man on the inside. Grant was still aligned with the banks and against the farmers, but the gold scheme was off to a good start. So as the summer starts to heat up, Corbin keeps the pressure on Grant. And it's going to be on a little trip that Corbin goes on with Grant that he makes a huge, huge turnaround. And this is something that he just, in my mind, the way that I read it, he just kind of threw out there. He didn't really think it was going to stick, but let me read this for you here so you can see. As they traveled over the Appalachians together, Corbin said something that clicked with Grant. The gold price was about America's place in the world. Russia also depended on grain exports. Corbin reminded the president, if American farmers didn't get the businesses, the Russians would. Russians would benefit at the expense of America. Is that what Grant wanted? Somewhere near the Eastern Continental Divide, the president, an avowed contradictionist, went the other way on gold. Corbin had done it without paying so much as a penny in bribes. He had turned the president's thinking on a core belief. The flip has taken place. Corbin gets home. He dashes over to see Jay Gould and he lets him know about Grant's flip. Gould, he is more than thrilled. He is ecstatic. Everything that they had gone through is starting to pay off. And the plot is now in full force. Gould goes out and he buys $9 million in contracts at $132. He currently owns 50% of the private gold supply that's located in New York. And remember, along with this, Gould, he also has his inside guy and that assistant secretary treasurer, Butterfield, who had agreed to tip him off if Grant was about to put more gold onto the market. Plus, the word of the president through Corbin gives him just massive, massive amounts of confidence. Yet this entire time, the Treasury Secretary Boutwell, he really wants to smash the gold price. It's starting to creep up higher and higher, and he does not like that one bit. Boutwell wanted to smash the price by unloading government gold and had gone as so far as to issue the order. He was about to cable the order to New York when Grant canceled it. Grant was fully committed to the farmers. He was not going to let the Treasury Secretary enrich a bunch of Russians. Then, just to double down on Grant's position here, more inside news comes along. When Corbin relayed this intelligence to Gould, it removed all doubt Gould had about his investment. And Gould does what Gould does best. He maximizes and buys as much gold as he possibly can get his hands on. And now, as an inside secret here, keep this in mind. Grant, he has no idea that Corbin is in on the scheme with Jay Gould. If he were to find out, all bets are off. He would surely release more gold into the market. This is something that they kept on the down low. But as summer starts to drag on, Jay Gould, he's starting to get a little bit anxious. He's got a lot of gold, and he wants to know if Grant is still holding his position on gold. And he makes a judgment error here. We don't see a lot of judgment errors out of Jay. Here's what happens. Gould did something rash. He instructed Corbin to dash off a letter to Grant. Repeat the arguments in favor of gold and see what Grant said in reply. And I think it's more about the way they actually try to get a response out of the president here. As I'm flipping through my notes, I wanted to cover this with you real quick. Yeah, here we go. So Grant, he's on vacation, and they send a letter overnight with a messenger. Plus, they demand an immediate response out of the president. So Grant, he gets the letter, he's reading it over. He had excused himself from the dinner party to read this message. And the messenger, he doesn't leave. He hangs out there. He wants an answer from Grant, and he asks if everything is still in order. And Grant's reply is that, yes, it's still in order. So the messenger, he rushes back to the nearest telegraph station and he sends a brief message to Gould, and he says, "Message delivered. all right. And Gould takes that last two words, all right, as meaning that Grant was still positive on gold. But inside Grant's head, something very, very differently is happening here. Suddenly, it all made sense. The meeting Corbin arranged on Fisk's boat, the night at the opera with Gould, Gould randomly popping up at Corbin's house whenever Grant was visiting. There was only one explanation. Corbin must be in cahoots with the gold crowd and had his own money on the line. Like cracks in a dam, things are about to unwind very, very quickly here. Jay Gould, he continues to buy more gold. He also convinces Fisk to join in his scheme. He really needs Fisk and his loud mouth to help him with his scheme, and this is going to be huge in a couple of days. Jim Fisk is going to help out pumping the gold price. So we're in the week in which Black Friday happens. It's Monday. The gold price, it's continuing to rise quite rapidly. Tuesday, the volumes are at record highs. Everybody wants gold. It's at 137. Jay Gould, he's elated. He drops by Corbin's house for a little celebration. But a huge bomb drops on Wednesday. From the book here, Corbin hustled him upstairs to the library so his wife couldn't hear. Grant was onto him, Corbin said. He didn't know how. All he knew was that his wife, the president's sister, had received a letter from Julia Grant, the president's wife, earlier in the day. It revealed that Grant had guessed that Corbin had financial interest in gold. My husband is very much annoyed by your speculations, wrote Julia Grant. You must close them as quickly as you can. The news was devastating for gold. It made it all but certain that the president would dump government gold on the market and crush the price. Jay Gould, he really needs to act fast here. He's got a mountain of gold. He's got to unleash it. He doesn't know when the government's going to dump gold, but he knows it's coming very soon. So what does he do? He initiates a pump and dump, and this is how it all goes down. First, Gould uses a series of brokers that's going to help him sell his gold on the market. But the key here is to sell it in secret, not to let anybody know that he's selling. That would not be good. He is seen as the leader of the bulls. He doesn't want to be seen as a seller. And second, he needs help to keep the bull rush in full force, because the more orders that are coming in for gold, the more that he can sell on these unsuspecting victims. And then third is his old pal Jim Fisk. He needs Fisk for the pump. And here's what Fisk did. He assigned Fisk to buy just enough gold to make the price go up. Gould would dump his gold on the other buyers that Fisk had lured in. Fisk would have to stir up a storm of activity for Gould to sell all of it. In Fisk, he executes with perfection. This is Thursday. At 11:30, Fisk felt the markets needed a jolt and took to the floor himself. Traders fell silent as his huge bulk breezed past them. "Gold!" Fisk yelled. "Sell it short and invite me to your funeral." He took bets that the gold would hit 200. Just as Fisk hoped, his enthusiasm inspired an army of copycats. The government's inaction served to endorse his bullishness. And Jay, he keeps selling and selling and selling, and he says the following about that day. And this is obviously several months later after the fact when he's being questioned. "I sold that day and only bought enough to make the street think I was a bull," Gould said afterwards. More than $320 million of gold trades hands. That's just wild. Jay, he dumps over half of his gold on Thursday, and he's almost clear. And keep in mind, he doesn't know when gold is going to be released onto the market. He's really playing a very, very dangerous game here. So on Friday, the pump Continues. Gold, it opens at 143. Fisk is out there on the gold floor. Imagine hearing him yell out, 145, he calls. Then a few moments later, put it to 150. And then he says, I'm feeling good. Give me all you can at 155. And then he says, push it to 160. And what happens? Orders follow all the way up the ladder. Meanwhile, Jay Gould, he's dumping the rest of his gold out on the market, and he's out. The last order for $1 million of gold at 162 executes right at 11 o'clock. Minutes later, the hammer drops. Butterfield stepped out to address the crowd. Butterfield said that he had just received word from Treasury Secretary Boutwell. He read it aloud. Sell 4 millions gold. That was it. The pleas of the bankers had been heard. It only needed to send a signal. Selling 4 million worth was the signal. And then just listen to how fast the gold price drops. Trinity Cathedral began to toll at the hour of 11. Before the bells could finish, the gold price had crashed from 162 to 145. Man, that's a huge drop. And the carnage is absolutely insane. The value of crops would drop almost instantly by about 50%. At least a dozen brokerage houses fail. Several banks fail. All stocks drop at least 20%. And it takes the economy about 6 months to recover. Jay Gould and Jim Fisk, they pushed the blame on President Grant, who to this very day carries that dark stain on his presidency. And in the very end, Fisk and Gould, they both walk away free men. They would never be charged with anything. Jay Gould puts about $12 million in his pocket, but he now has this deeper, dark stain on his reputation. And guess what? He does not give a shit. Let me read to you real quick what the Times called him. The Times likened Jay Gould to Mephistopheles, the devil of German folklore. And then over in the Greeley Tribune, they called Gould and Fisk public enemies. That is brutal. But like I said, he doesn't give a shit about what people think about him. He simply executes his plans. All right, so if we keep moving on here, Black Friday is over. Gould is going to face more than 100 lawsuits, and I think it takes something like 10 years to clear all of those up. But he's still president of the Erie Railroad. But the board, they're not happy with Jay. The debts are massive, and several board members are aware that Gould was using the company as his own personal piggy bank, and they don't like that. So they hold a board meeting without him, and the root of that is they fire him. And here's what his lawyer tells him to do. To protect his legal position, he should go to his office, lock the door, and let the police remove him by force. Gould complied, locking himself up in with Sherman. Sherman was the lawyer. To bolster the defenses, he ripped a curtain sash off the wall and tied together the door handles. He shoved his desk across the room to block the entrance. And the reason that Gould did this, well, one was on the counsel of his lawyer, and two was that the bylaws of the company said that only Gould could call a meeting. So basically, he was just trying to prove a point here that meeting that was being held was illegal. However, Gould, he knew his time was very short here. And with a little bit of advice, he actually takes a very bad situation and he turns it around to his benefit. And that's the reason why I wanted to include this particular part in the episode. And here's the advice that he got. If Gould quit, the board would drop the legal challenges and repay $2 million that Gould had loaned Erie. Gould was unmoved. Running the Erie Railroad was the best job he ever had. Even in the railroad's weakened condition, it offered opportunities for profit. It would take more than a promise and a loan repayment to get him to quit. Playing his last card, Sickles gave a stock forecast. If you resign, it will send the price of the Erie up 15 points, he said. You can make $1 million. Gould perked up. He had seen himself as a Vanderbilt, building a railroad empire, but he was sufficiently aware to know his reputation as Mephistopheles weighed on the Erie stock. Gould agreed that once he had vanished, the Erie stock would rise and he would make a quick score. So once Jay's made this decision, very quickly he gathers up the board and he calls a meeting with them, and it's very short and sweet. Here's what he says. He called a meeting to order. Gentlemen, Gould said, I herewith then resign the office of president of the Erie Railroad Company. And that is it. Jay Gould, he is out. So the price doesn't go up a little, it goes up a lot. It goes from 45 to 75. He makes multiple times 1 million on that sale, but he's out. He's a freelancer at this point, and he's rich. I mean, he could have just walked away and done nothing else. And he obviously doesn't know it. He only has about 20 years left to live, but he's really deeply driven. And what does he do? He's going to hop right back in. From the moment he left Erie headquarters, he stepped onto 23rd Street as an unemployed corporate president. He dreamed of new opportunities and greater riches. Gould regarded his millions as grubstake, the starter money for making even more. A little money and perseverance will make any man rich, he liked to say. And he had perseverance, and now he had money. He had the requisites for a spectacular fortune. The question was how to get it. And for Jay Gould, he's about to go all in on the railroads. He had this really grand vision of a transcontinental railroad to get from coast to coast. To get from coast to coast at that time, he had to take 4 different railroads. He wanted to see this accomplished on one railroad. This was his big dream. Plus, then just add to the fact that railroads were changing the world. They fascinated him. When talking about railroads, he sounded like a kid with toy trains. I have been interested in railroads ever since I was a boy, he told the reporter. I now think the railroad train is one of the grandest sights in the world. I like to see the great driving wheels flying around. He clung to a dream he developed at Erie, the dream of creating the nation's first seamless transcontinental line of railroad track. And what does he do? He sets his sights on the Union Pacific. They had a monopoly as the only railroad that had passage over the Rockies, and he saw this as the starting point. If you recall, in the very last episode, we spoke about H.J. Heinz and how the financial panic of 1872 wiped him out, forcing him into bankruptcy. That panic, it was really devastating on the railroads also. More than half of the nation's railroads failed during that financial panic. In fact, that panic, it goes on for 5 years. And prior to the Great Depression, it was the biggest panic that America has ever seen. Well, for Gould, it also spurs him into the Union Pacific. You see, what he had done is he had set a large buy order on the Union Pacific at a rock bottom price. In one day, well, it hits. He got his price and bought enough shares to name himself president. My orders caught, Gould said. Yes, they did. So Jay Gould, he is now the president of the Union Pacific. And this time around, he's going to turn more towards a good operator. He's still shrewd in the business perspective, but he really does move to make improvements here. It says he built a steel mill in Wyoming to supply track for less than the outside suppliers. Money is made by saving as well as earning, he told a subordinate. He took trips out west, flying down the rails in his private train and dictating notes to an assistant. He courted ranchers and miners for business and encouraged his executives to get out of the office and follow his lead. Our men on the ground have the intelligence we need, he wrote to one executive. Revenue was up and costs were down. For the first time, the company was turning a profit. For the first time, it would also pay a dividend. Jay Gould, the good operator, is working his magic here. All those years of learning on the job are paying off huge. He's turned this around and he's made the Union Pacific profitable. Now, the next thing that I wanted to cover with you is the interesting way that Gould uses the railroad to build other businesses that were complementary in nature. In this case, it's the telegraph. Gould was keenly interested in the telegraph business. Telegraphy went hand in hand with railroading. Telegraph companies strung their lines along railroad tracks. Railroads set up dispatch operations in their stations. Western Union dominated the business. In Gould, he feels so strongly about this, he says the following: I would rather be president of the Western Union than president of the United States, Gould told an associate. Now, the Union Pacific, they have their own little telegraph operations. It's called Atlantic and Pacific. But it was really a sad state of a business when compared against the Western Union. However, Gould, he has this plan to fire up a price war against the Western Union. You see, there was this young, struggling inventor. His name is Thomas Edison. He had invented a machine. It was called the quadruplex. Basically, it lets you send 4 messages at one time versus what Western Union was doing, just sending 1 message at a time. So Gould and Edison, they meet up one day. And Jay says that he is willing to give Edison $30,000 for his machine. And keep in mind here that Edison, he can barely pay his rent. He's not famous yet by any means. And here is his response: I will sell you any interest I have for that amount, Edison said. Gould wrote him a check. Edison agreed to come work for him and perfect the device. In Gould, he's really only going to use that machine as a threat against the Western Union. Being able to send 4 messages at once, Gould could tell a story about being able to undercut Western Union's rates and take its business away. Gould shorted Western Union and announced he now owned the technology that would change the industry. Western Union's shareholders panicked. So we see that Gould is also a master marketer here. For Edison, he doesn't work for Gould that long. He found Jay Gould to be very odd. And just check this out, what he says. Edison was chief electrician for the Atlantic and Pacific. He lasted a month before he lost patience with the company's president. Gould offered Edison thousands of Atlantic and Pacific shares to stay, but the inventor was not interested. Not only did he hate his boss, but he found Gould strange and unsettling. Gould had a peculiar eye, Edison later wrote. There was a strain of insanity somewhere. And so Jay Gould, he takes the quadruplex, he generates a lot of buzz around it. And after that, the stock price of the Atlantic and Pacific, it rises. He takes the company public. And from the book here, it says, this stunned Western Union. And then Gould turns around and he loots Western Union's customers. It says, by persuading the Baltimore and Ohio to break its contract and come to him. Pennsylvania, New York Central, and Erie followed. Western Union, the monopolist, suddenly looked vulnerable. It's just amazing how much power Gould has to take this shamble of a company and prop it up and make it look so good and steal business away from the Western Union. Gould, he continues to push harder. He launches a rate war against Western Union, and he starts insisting that they buy the Atlantic and the Pacific, and you know what? They do. To end the pain, Western Union bought Atlantic and Pacific for $5 million. So Gould, he had about $1 million in to get started. He just sold it for $5 million. Thomas Edison, he gives us some additional insights about Jay Gould around this time. He says, he certainly had one trait that all men must have who want to succeed, Edison said. He collected every kind of information and statistics about his schemes and had all the data. It's all about the data, data, and more data. I really believe that if Jay Gould were alive today, he would be in charge of some of the largest AI and data companies on the face of the planet. Jay Gould uses that data to his advantage to make that deal with the Western Union and also enrich himself greatly. So as we keep moving forward here, Jay Gould, he's going to continue to acquire railroads. Next up on the docket is the Kansas Pacific. But at the time when he wanted to acquire it, it was too expensive for him, or probably more than he wanted to pay. At that point, he was a fairly wealthy man. And so what he saw in the Kansas Pacific was that they made most of their profits through their subsidiary line, the Denver Pacific, which ran a profitable line from Denver up to Cheyenne. It was the only route available, and that's where the company made most of their money. Well, Gould, what does he do? He goes out and he buys a smaller railroad, the Colorado Central, and he builds his own line between Denver and Cheyenne. Then what does he do? He takes a page from his playbook and he initiates a price war. That hurts the Kansas Pacific's profits. Well, when their revenues are down, their stock prices go down, and the stock is now on sale. From Jay Gould's perspective, he swoops in, he buys up enough stock to take control of the Kansas Pacific. Just ruthless what he was willing to do. Again, he didn't give a shit about what anyone else thought. He simply put a plan together and he frickin' executed it. Now, after this, Gould, he starts going on what I call a railroad buying spree. And it really was. And remember, he has this dream that he's chasing of a transcontinental railroad, and he really wants to build this up. And he jumps in full force. From the book here, the pace and volume of activity was like nothing ever seen in corporate America. It was as if Delmonico's was offering railroads as entrees and Jay Gould ordered everything on the menu. Gould bought the Delaware, Lackawanna and Western, the Central of New Jersey, the Denver and Rio Grande, the International Great Northern, the Missouri, Kansas, Texas, the New York and New England, the St. Louis, Iron Mountain and Southern, the Texas and Pacific, and the Utah Central. If you're counting, that is 11 railroads that he is the sole decision maker over 16,000 miles of tracks. At one point, he owns 1 out of every 6 miles of track in the United States. That is just wild. And one thing that I found interesting and I wanted to call out here, Gould is driving his buying spree, stealing a page from John D. Rockefeller here. He says, Gould was aware of how Rockefeller, from a small central office in Cleveland, was using coercion to grab every oil refinery he could. Gould longed to lead a similar process in railroads. Consolidation will prove both essential and inevitable, he wrote in Associate. What was needed, he continued, was unchallenged market domination. And that is what Jay Gould would do. He would continue to dominate the market. In the book, we see this strategy in action. His reputation as a cutthroat helped him at the bargaining table. He was seen as the gangster who demanded a slice of a restaurant's receipts. The owner could either submit or suffer the consequences. Thomas Allen was a Missouri congressman and owner of the Iron Mountain. Allen didn't want to sell. Gould forced Allen to terms by buying his competitors and surrounding him. I thought that by selling, I would be able to secure harmony, Allen said. No competitor was too big to attack. Gould bought the Lackawanna for the single purpose of pressuring the New York Central and intimidating William Vanderbilt. It worked. Vanderbilt shocked Wall Street by selling Gould a stake in Central, the jewel of his late father's empire. And what a strategy. You're squeezing the life out of your competitors around you by opening new roads and rate wars and coercion. He was quite the aggressive man here, going exactly after what he wanted, and he got it. All right, so let's see. We've been going on for quite some time here. If you're still listening, thank you for listening this far. So there's one more section that I wanted to cover with you today before we wrap up the show. And this has to do with the Western Union. Jay, he's going to run his playbook here to perfection to take over the Western Union. First, he forms a brand new company called American Union. Next, he orders all of his railroads. By this point, he's got a dozen or more railroads. He orders them to cancel all of their contracts with Western Union, so they lose all that business. Then the ruthless part. Just listen to this. This is a little bit wild here. Gould was ruthless as always. Western Union operated a battery station in Omaha for the telegraph lines that ran along the Union Pacific tracks. Gould's men cut the station wires and hooked them up to stations belonging to American Union. The same sort of thing happened across the country. At every Gould railroad, Western Union battery stations were left with nothing to power. Then he turned to persuading other railroads, notably the Baltimore and Ohio, to come to his side. And that gives him momentum to take the company public. And then the public marketing. He starts declaring Western Union as the evil monopoly, and that the American Union was created to give the American public choice. He pushes that narrative hard in the media. So with the Western Union stock price falling, William Vanderbilt, who is the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, he's also the president and the chairman of Western Union, he invites Jay Gould over to his house one evening for some peace talks. There's not going to be a lot of peace here. And what does he learn? He learns that Jay Gould is the largest single private shareholder of Western Union stocks. That gives him incredible leverage. They don't reach a deal, so they agree to meet the following night. And here comes Jay again, just ruthless. They convened again the following evening in a meeting that lasted half the night. Gould demanded that Western Union buy American Union at a price nearly 4 times the $4 million Gould and his friends had already invested in the company. Gould insisted that Vanderbilt immediately resign as chairman of Western Union and cede the job to him. He vowed to buy even more shares in Western Union if Vanderbilt didn't step down. When Vanderbilt recovered his composure, he realized it was over for him. That particular deal is going to net Jay Gould more than $2 million in profit. It also makes him the president and chairman of Western Union. His dream about running the Western Union had come true because previously he said he would rather be president of Western Union than president of the United States. And here he is, president of the Western Union. So as we keep moving forward here, just wanted to switch real quickly and leave a few comments in regards to his personal life. Now, outside of work, Jay was a family man. He didn't go out and socialize with others. And he really preferred a quiet life at home with his wife and his children. And from Gould's own lips, he says the following: "I have the disadvantage of not being sociable," he told a reporter. "Wall Street men are fond of company and sport. A man makes $100,000 there and immediately buys a yacht, begins to drive fast horses, and becomes a sport generally. My tastes lie in a different direction. When business hours are over, I go home and spend the remainder of my day with my wife, my children, and the books in my library. Every man has a natural inclination of his own. Mine are domestic. They are not calculated to make me particularly popular on Wall Street. I cannot help that. And I think the lesson here is regardless of your business, I believe that it's really important to have avenues in which you can unwind, have a safe space that you can go that's for yourself. For Jay Gould, it was his home and it was his family. Now, for Jay, he's going to pass away at the age of 56 in 1892. And he never saw that dream of the Transcontinental Railroad come true. I do believe that if he would have lived, say, another 20 years to 76, that he would have accomplished that dream. He was ruthless in what he wanted. He was driving aggressively hard for it. And at one point, he owns a dozen or more railroads. And I think that he definitely would have gotten there. I just wanted to say thanks for listening today. I really do value your time, especially if you've made it this far. I know this is kind of a long episode. And I just wanted to make a couple of comments in regards to the podcast. It's been about 6 or 7 weeks since I released the last episode. And I just wanted to let you all know that I'm full force on the podcast. I had to take some time off to help my wife with her business. We're expanding it. And for the last 6 weeks or so, I've been working 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, helping her expand that business. We are in the restaurant and the baking industry, and we had the opportunity to make some expansions, and it's been incredibly hard work, but that has slowed down now, and we're in a state where we're normal operations again. And that gives me time to start reading more and start outlining and recording podcasts. So I expect that probably over the next couple of months, I'll be releasing new episodes every 2 to 3 weeks. And then I hope to get to a point where I'm back to putting episodes out just whenever I can get them ready. Normally that's anywhere from 8 to 10 days, give or take, to get episodes out there. But I just wanted to say thank you. I've seen the downloads increase quite a bit while I've been away helping my wife, and I appreciate everyone listening. I appreciate the downloads and the streams, a couple comments as well, and reviews that people have left. I really appreciate that. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to support the show is just super simple. Subscribe on your favorite platform. If you could leave a review, if you find some value, that would help me out a lot. And then if you use the link in the show notes to buy the books, that goes directly to help support children's literacy. This is an ad-free show. I do intend to keep it that way for as long as I possibly can. My dream is to do this full-time, long-term, so that I can bring you guys more great content like this. I also have some other ideas about how I can deliver value for you guys through additional episodes or mini episodes, or a lot of these books. I find that there's so much material in them that I could probably make, 2 or 3 kind of behind the scenes types of episodes that just explain some of the things that don't make the main show. So I want to keep doing this and keep delivering value for you. I don't want to get to a point where I have to charge or do any advertising. I really do this as a service for anybody who wants to listen, anybody who enjoys entrepreneurship, anyone who enjoys business or just listening to good stories or learning lessons that can help make things better for yourself or your customers at the end of the day. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Until next time, make it a beautiful day in the neighborhood, my friend.